This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, a real intellectual epic. Medieval philosophy. We're talking about that vast stretch, roughly 4th century up to the 14th.
Yeah, 1,000 years. And it's often misunderstood, I think. People sometimes imagine a gap, but it was incredibly dynamic.
Exactly. Not a dark age at all. It was this really pivotal time defined by a massive collision.
Absolutely. It's where the Greek system of reason, Plato, Aristotle, pure logic, smashes right into the Abrahamic system of revelation. So Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and their sacred texts.
And that encounter, well, it didn't just add something new. It fundamentally reshaped philosophy itself, didn't it?
Completely. The core idea, and you see this across the board, is that philosophy's role changes. It's essentially reconfigured to serve theology.
Reason becomes this tool, right? A way to understand and systematize what's revealed through faith.
Precisely. And critically, you can't really grasp this by looking at Europe and the Islamic world in isolation. That's a mistake.
Right. You have to see it as this single, interconnected, intellectual circuit, like a giant translation highway.
Yeah, a translation circuit is a great way to put it. Ideas, especially Aristotelian thought, are flowing constantly. Greece to the caliphates, back into Latin Europe. It's one big conversation, really.
That interconnectivity is key. Okay, so let's try and unpack this 1,000-year story. We're going to use a 5-stage framework to make sense of it all.
Sounds good. A kind of philosophical drama in 5 acts.
Exactly. Starting with the foundations in the Christian West, then following the action as it shifts east, seeing it reach this incredible peak, and then, well, watching the cracks appear.
Charting the rise and fall of this grand attempt to perfectly harmonize reason and faith.
Okay, Act 1, the foundation. Let's start with Augustine. We're talking roughly 4th to 6th centuries here. He really sets the stage, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Augustine, living from 354 to 430, he's the first great synthesizer. He's facing this powerful inheritance from Greek thought, especially Plato, and his concept of eternal forms or ideas.
And he doesn't just reject Plato.
No, not at all. That's the genius of it. He integrates Platonic ideas into Christian thought. He argues these eternal forms aren't floating out there somewhere independently.
Okay. So where are they?
They are the eternal truths residing eternally in the mind of God. He internalizes them within the divine intellect.
Wow. Okay. So he takes Plato's core metaphysics and sort of baptizes it, you could say?
In a way, yes. And the consequence for philosophy is profound. It stops being just about looking outwards at the empirical world.
It becomes more inward-looking.
Exactly. It's about internal ascent. If the ultimate truths are in God and the human mind reflects God, then you seek truth by looking within yourself, finding that divine spark.
Which leads us to that famous Latin phrase.
Crede ut intelligam. I believe in order to understand. Faith comes first, it illuminates the path, and then reason steps in as the tool, the servant, dedicated to comprehending what faith reveals.
Got it. So Augustine lays the philosophical groundwork, but then the Roman Empire is crumbling. Someone needs to actually save the texts, right?
Precisely. That brings us to stage 2, maybe the 6th to 9th centuries, Boethius and the act of preservation.
Ah, Boethius, the last of the Romans sometimes called.
A tragic figure, really. Boethius around 480 to 524. He's writing amidst chaos, eventually imprisoned and executed. But before that, his great project was translation.
He was the crucial conduit, the pipe man, as some sources say.
Absolutely. He undertook this massive effort to translate and comment on key works of both Aristotle and Plato into Latin. His Constellation of Philosophy, written in prison, is famous, but his translation work was arguably even more critical for the long term.
So he's basically bottling up Greek philosophy for the Latin West before the lights go out completely.
He saved the seeds, yes. But here's a really important point. What Boethius primarily translated and what the early Latin West knew of Aristotle was mainly his logic. The organon, the tools for thinking.
Not the full system, the metaphysics, the physics.
Not really, no, not yet. That comprehensive Aristotle wasn't widely available in Latin at this stage. So this period is really about translation and preservation, keeping the logical tools alive. The full Aristotelian revolution, well, that was about to ignite somewhere else entirely.
Okay, so the stage shifts.
Yeah.
Act 3. The Islamic Renaissance and Aristotle's grand re-entrance. We're talking roughly 8th to 12th centuries. Why there? Why then?
Well, you have relative political stability under the Abbasid Caliphate, especially in centers like Baghdad. And crucially, there's this enormous state-sponsored translation movement.
Translating from?
Directly from Greek and Syriac sources into Arabic. And they translated everything Plato, Aristotle, Galen, Euclid, the whole corpus of Greek knowledge.
Not just the logic like in the West earlier.
Exactly, the full package. And this flood of new material, especially the complete Aristotle, fuels this incredible intellectual flourishing. It launches this grand experiment in what we call rational theology.
Rational theology, trying to square reason and revelation.
Precisely that. An intense effort to find harmony between reason in Arabic and revelation. Why? How does this amazing logical system of Aristotle fit with the Quran?
And this period gives us some absolute giants of philosophy. Let's talk about the big three. First up, Al-Farabi.
Al-Farabi, around 870–950. Hugely important. He's often called the second teacher after Aristotle. He did foundational works synthesizing Plato's political thought with Aristotle's logic, applying reason to understand the ideal state and society. Logic was key for him.
Okay. Then comes maybe the most famous name, at least in terms of later influence in Europe, Ibn Sina, or Avicenna.
Avicenna, 980–1037. Just monumental. His philosophical and medical works were standard texts for centuries, both East and West. If you're interested in metaphysics, he's unavoidable. His influence on later Christian scholasticism on people like Aquinas was immense.
What was his key metaphysical idea?
He really sharpens the definition of God. He moves beyond just arguing God exists to defining God ontologically as the necessary existence.
Necessary existence. Meaning?
Meaning, God's very essence is to exist. God cannot not exist. Everything else, you, me, the planets we, are merely possible existences. We depend entirely on that one necessary existence for our being. It provided this powerful logical framework for creation.
That's a very powerful concept. Okay, and the third of the big three, the one who really stirred things up later in Europe, Ibn Rushd, or Averroes.
Averroes, 1126–1198. Based mostly in Cordoba, Spain, he was the great commentator on Aristotle. His goal was to purify Aristotle, to understand him on his own terms, perhaps more rigorously than anyone before.
And why was he controversial?
Because his detailed commentaries emphasized the power and, seemingly, the independence of reason. When his works were translated into Latin, often alongside Aristotle's own texts, they seemed to suggest philosophy could reach truths, like the eternity of the world, perhaps, that contradicted religious doctrine, like creation ex nihilo.
The dreaded double truth idea. That philosophical truth and religious truth might conflict.
Exactly. Whether Averroes himself believed in double truth is debated, but that's how some in the Latin West interpreted him, and it was seen as incredibly dangerous to the Augustinian synthesis, where all truth is ultimately one divine truth.
So now the intellectual circuit completes its loop. Aristotle, enriched and debated by these Islamic thinkers, arrives back in the Latin West in full force.
Right. Often through translations from Arabic into Latin, happening in places like Toledo in Spain and Sicily. This is stage 4, Latin scholasticism triumphant, really peaking in the 11th to 13th centuries.
And this wasn't just a quiet reception. It caused a shockwave.
A massive shockwave. Suddenly, the universities Paris, Oxford, Bologna have access to this incredibly powerful, comprehensive system from Aristotle that seems capable of explaining the natural world, ethics, politics, everything. Potentially without needing scripture. That's a huge challenge.
Before we get to the peak figure, there were precursors trying to use reason more boldly, like Anselm.
Yes, Anselm of Canterbury around 1033–1109. He comes a bit before the full Aristotelian flood, but he's already pushing the boundaries of reason within faith. Famous for his ontological argument for God's existence, trying to prove God must exist based purely on the concept of God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived, using reason alone to establish a core tenet of faith.
But the figure who really takes on the full challenge of Aristotle and integrates it is Thomas Aquinas.
The angelic doctor. Thomas Aquinas, 1225–1274, absolutely central. He confronts the Aristotelian challenge head-on. Instead of rejecting Aristotle, he undertakes this monumental task of synthesizing the entire Aristotelian system, the physics, metaphysics, ethics, politics, with Catholic doctrine.
Creating the ultimate harmony of faith and reason? That was his goal, wasn't it?
That was the explicit project. His masterwork, the Summa Theologiae, is this incredible architecture. He argues reason and faith are two distinct paths to truth, but they can't ultimately contradict because both originate in God.
So reason can take us so far.
Right. Reason can understand the natural world, prove God's existence from observing creation, establish natural law. It prepares the ground for faith. But some truths, the Trinity, the Incarnation, creation out of nothing, are beyond reason's grasp and must be accepted through revelation.
He assigns them different spheres, but ensures they work together under God.
Exactly. He uses Aristotle wherever possible to explain the structure of reality, but subordinates it to revealed truth where necessary. It's an incredibly stable, comprehensive system. It became the dominant framework for Catholic thought for centuries.
It sounds almost unshakable, the perfect synthesis achieved. But philosophical systems rarely stay stable forever.
Indeed. Stability often invites its own deconstruction. And that brings us to our final act, Stage 5, the decomposition of scholasticism in the 14th century.
And the key figure here is an Englishman, William of Ockham.
Occam, roughly 1287–1347, famous for Occam's razor, the principle of simplicity. But his deeper impact comes from his attack on the very foundation of Aquinas' synthesis, which rested heavily on the reality of universals. Concepts like humanity, justice, redness, Aquinas, following a moderate realism, believed these universals had some kind of reality, grounded ultimately in God's mind or inherent in things.
Okay, and Occam comes along and says,
Occam champions nominalism. It's a radical idea. Universals do not exist as real entities.
wait, so humanity isn't real? Only individual humans?
Exactly. For Occam, only individuals are truly real. This specific person, that specific cat, this particular instance of red. Universal terms like humanity or redness are just names, nomina in Latin, hence nominalism. They're mental concepts we use for convenience, for grouping things, but they don't correspond to any real thing out there called humanity.
Okay, I can see how that's philosophically interesting, but why is it a system killer for Aquinas' harmony?
It's devastating because it severs the reliable link between human reason and the divine order. Aquinas' system depended on these real universals to map the structure of creation and understand God's plan rationally. If universals are just names, that whole intricate structure built on shared essences and categories starts to look shaky.
Our concepts don't necessarily map onto reality in the way Aquinas thought.
Right. And this philosophical move has a huge theological consequence for Occam. If our universal concepts are just convenient fictions, then our ability to use reason to understand God's nature or the necessity of his choices is severely limited.
How so?
Occam puts enormous emphasis on God's absolute omnipotence and freedom. God's will is radically free. He doesn't operate according to necessary rational structures that we can grasp through universal concepts. He could have made the world completely differently if he'd chosen.
So, because God is absolutely free and not bound by these universal concepts we use, our reason can't really penetrate the why of God's creation.
Pretty much. Reason becomes limited. We can observe the individuals God has created, the empirical facts of the world, but we can't deduce necessary truths about God's nature or eternal plans through reason alone. Those things must be known through faith, through revelation, which tells us about God's contingent, freely chosen actions.
Wow. So that harmony Aquinas built, Occam basically takes a hammer to.
He shatters it. Faith and reason are driven apart again. Faith deals with God's unknowable free will, revealed contingently. Reason is pushed back towards the empirical world, towards studying the only things Occam thinks are truly real individuals.
Which sounds kind of modern, actually.
It is. This emphasis on individuals, on empirical observation, and the limitation of reason in metaphysics, it signals the powerful reindependence of reason, but now focused on the observable world. It really paves the way for the Renaissance focus on the particular, for empirical science, and eventually for thinkers like Descartes who would try to rebuild knowledge on a new, non-scholastic foundation.
Okay, let's try and pull this 1,000-year thread together. We started with fusion, peaked with harmony, ended with separation.
That's the narrative arc in a nutshell. Medieval philosophy in this telling begins with Augustine's foundational fusion, reaches its perfect peak with Thomas, and cracks irrevocably with Occam's nominalism. You see this journey of reason trying to unite with faith, achieving a moment of synthesis, and then ultimately asserting its own kind of autonomy again.
And the role of reason itself keeps morphing throughout, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It starts as an Augustinian Platonic tool for internal ascent towards God. Then it becomes this powerful Aristotelian instrument under Aquinas for understanding the entire structure of the created world. And finally, with Occam, it starts to become this more focused empirical tool, looking at individual things, a precursor to scientific reason asserting its independence.
And it's amazing how the core tension, how much do we rely on revelation versus reason or empirical data, is still completely relevant today.
It defines so many debates, doesn't it? Science versus faith, the limits of rationality, the nature of truth. You're wrestling with the legacy of this period constantly, whether you realize it or not. We're still living in Occam's shadow in many ways.
It really is an intellectual chain reaching right down to us.
Definitely. And maybe here's a final thought for you to chew on, something that ties this all together. Think about why these thinkers, particularly in the Islamic world and then later in the Latin West, embraced Aristotle so fiercely.
Because he offered a powerful system.
Yes, but powerful for what? Consider this.
Hmm.
They had these complex, sophisticated theological doctrines derived from sacred texts. They needed an equally sophisticated, rigorous, logical system to understand, defend, and systematize those doctrines against internal and external challenges.
So Aristotle wasn't just adopted out of curiosity, but out of theological necessity.
Arguably, yes. So the provocative question is, how much did the sheer necessity of harmonizing Greek logic with Abrahamic revelation actually force these cultures to develop and internalize incredibly sophisticated habits of logical analysis, argumentation, and critical thinking? Habits that, ironically perhaps, laid the essential groundwork for the later rise of secular reason, the Enlightenment, and modern science itself.
Wow. So the defense of faith might have inadvertently forged the tools that would later challenge it.
It's a fascinating possibility, isn't it, that the intense pressure to make revelation rational ultimately supercharged rationality itself. Something to think about.
That is a fantastic point to end on. Thank you for guiding us through that incredible 1,000-year journey. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us for this deep dive.
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.